Hey, Vinyl Community, Jeff back again. Time for another one of my perfect 10s. Yes, I went ahead and continued. I'm going to continue into the other eras, the other genres of music that I have my divisions up into. As I explained in my very last one of these, I have the main section, which is all these behind me, and then one rack in front of me. And that's the A to Z's of the heavier stuff, more modern, heavier, what I would consider my metal section, hard rock and metal. And then over here I've got classic rock. I kind of like to keep them separate because it's a lot of bands that I just feel like if they get mingled into the regular section, they might be forgotten about sometimes. Whereas I feel like if I'm in the mood for something a little more classic rock, a little more laid back than, the more edgier stuff, I'll go to this section over here. So that's where I keep a lot of that. And then there are some bands that are a little, in order to break it up and keep the sections smaller, I have a pop section. So it's pop and rock. And this is rock and hard rock. And this is hard rock and metal. So anyway, we're going to jump into the rock and hard rock section. Probably could get 2 or 3 videos out of that before moving into the pop rock and other sections. So anyway, let's get into this. We know how the game goes. Just pulling the 10th album, 10 albums, every 10th album in my collection, just to see what randomly comes out. And I got this from Rick at Rick and Records quite a while back, and he started it, and then I continued doing it. So all right, let's get into that. We're starting in the A's, and the first one up is AltarBoys, No Substitute. AltarBoys is a pop punk, Christian pop punk band from the 80s. And this is a later album that came out. It was released on vinyl later on. I can't even read that because it is too small. But anyway, probably their most recent release or vinyl reissue type thing. So yeah. Loved the AltarBoys back in the day. They were just a little bit on the, like I say, a little bit on the edgier side, but not metal. Just fun stuff. They had a couple great albums out there. All right, Armegeddon. This is the album I think that everybody sees probably everywhere. I seem to run across this a lot. I ran across this in a thrift store a couple years ago. I vividly remember seeing it and grabbing it for cheap in decent condition. And this is, I'm totally drawing a blank. It's the drummer that was in Captain Beyond and other things. Anyway, classic rock, just some classic rock. And I see this album quite often, and it always tends to be in pretty rough condition as far as the cover. I guess somebody really enjoyed, this band. All right, moving into the B's with Tomcat and Blackfoot. I have a good majority of the Blackfoot stuff. I picked up No Reservation the other day. I showed in a video, which I think only leaves the earlier album. There's one of the first 2 albums, and then you get into the whole animal things. I think I've got all the animals, and then you're moving into the era where there weren't a lot of vinyl releases. So yeah, one of my favorite southern rock bands from back in the day. So there you go, Tomcat. All right, this one I talked about not too long ago because this is a reissue from I think last year. Halcyon Days from ChagallGuevara. ChagallGuevara was a band that did One and Done back in the 90s, or late 80s, early 90s. They had a song on a soundtrack. Anyway, it was a great first album. Anyway, it was made up of kind of a super group of a bunch of musicians from a bunch of different bands. And then a couple years ago, they started a Kickstarter with the idea of, started with an idea of reissuing a live album, and then it raised so much money so fast that they started throwing in extras, including going in and recording some new songs. They got the band back together, record some new songs. They actually raised enough money to put together a concert and did a show for the people who supported it and whatever, and released some songs, some brand new songs, and then they turned around and reissued their first album on vinyl, that one that had been released in the 90s, which was really a lot of hard work to get a hold of the information for that and do it, but they did it. So this was the new release that they did, which they recorded strictly for this venture, and it's got some great songs, like I say, modern versions of the band together. All right, MorganCryar. I see we're getting into seems like there's a lot of Christian bands here. MorganCryar was a Yeah, contemporary Christian, a little bit on the edgier side, hard rock, contemporary Christian band. Thing interesting about this album is at the time this album was being recorded and toured for, the studio musicians that were brought in to do much of this album were people, and who wrote a lot of the songs were like Ty Tabor, Doug Pinnick, anyway, Jerry Gaskell. Anyway, the backing band for this, for a lot of this and this tour was the guys from King's X. It was kind of like them pulling their, doing their early trials before they actually went totally on their own to do their own thing. I saw MorganCryar in 1987, which would have been shortly after this album, at Cornerstone Festival, but I'm pretty sure by that point, I don't think the guys in King's, I would have known them if it was, but I didn't. I've got a couple pictures, and that doesn't look like they were touring with them, but the pictures only show like one guy, so maybe, I don't know if they were playing with them then, but that would have been interesting to know. Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, my music, all of the stuff is mixed with Christian and non-Christian stuff, but here's another one, David and the Giants. David and the Giants are a band. I was living in Mississippi at the time. They were a band from Mississippi, but a little further upstate, so we saw them quite often. They would come and play between Louisiana and Mississippi, and I got to see them quite a few times. They started off as a band that just played regular mainstream music, and then at some point the guys, started singing songs about their faith and stuff, and that's where this album falls in with a bunch of their other albums. And yeah, saw them a couple times live. The big draw with them is the drummer. The drummer is the drummer that, as a kid, was on I Love Lucy. It's Little Ricky, and I'm sure he gets so sick of, people would come up to him even to this day. Keith Thibodeau. People would come up to him even to the days when we saw him in the 80s, and they're like, you're the drummer from Little Richie. I'm sure he could not get rid of that fast enough. But anyway, so that was his claim to fame, and yeah. And I remember just seeing them back in the day. He had a big drum set. He had definitely looked like something out of a metal band, but they're just straight up hard rock. Hard rock with the pop sensibilities. Great stuff. All right, DeGarmoAndKey. Another... At this time, they were kind of on the classic rock, bluesy rock type flair. They later went on to become very keyboard-oriented pop, contemporary Christian pop. At this point, they were a little bit more on the edge rock stuff. So this is one of their early albums. All of their earlier albums have been reissued on vinyl recently by Gura Music. This is the OG copy. I have one of the reissues from them, or two, I think, one or two, but that is one of the OGs. All right, Greatest Eagles Volume 2. If I'm not mistaken, I think this was thrown into a package that I ordered. It was just thrown in as a stiffener. Turns out it was in like great condition, but it's such a common record that I guess that person just used it as a stiffener. And it goes good because I already had two copies of Eagles Greatest Hits Volume 1. So anyway, everybody probably knows this album, Greatest Hits. All right, Follower, Into the Sun. So, great album. I bought this back in the early days of getting into vinyl because I remember loving this album back in the day. And I'll tell you the funny thing about this album is I got it, and inside it is a promo letter. There's a promo letter in here, and it's written to one Dave Johnson of White Throne Magazine. Funny thing is, I know Dave Johnson. Met him back in Cornerstone in 87. I have a friend who's a real good friend of his still to this day. Dave Johnson kind of fell off the radar as far as being involved in this stuff, but was big time communication with him back in the day. White Throne Magazine was one of the big Christian fanzines back in the day, them and Heaven's Metal. And yeah, so that's funny that somehow I ended up with a copy of the album way over here in Virginia that originally somehow was in California in Dave Johnson's hands at some point back in the day. This is an older album from the 80s. Great stuff, just solid hard rock. I just remember liking them back in the day. All right, and then this is one I picked up not too long ago, Interview by GentleGiant. Yeah, in the past, well, a couple over in South Carolina, and then a couple weeks ago, I picked up 3 or 4 different GentleGiant albums in the past couple months, and this is one of them. GentleGiant being one of the early prog bands from the 70s. It influenced a lot of other bands that I listen to, and I hear a lot of their types of things in these other bands, so they were very influential, but still have a handful of way to go with GentleGiant, but this is one of the ones. So there you go. There's the first 10 of the rock section over here, and so we'll move on and do another one soon. Thanks a lot for watching. Rock on and rock hard.